Hi everyone, we're going to continue talking about the London system here, and in this video we're going to look at plans where the players get their queens to the B file like this, and we're going to look at a case where white gets there first, and then we'll look at a case where black gets there first. Alright, so let's say d4, d5, bishop f4 occurs, the London system. Knight f6, e3, and now if black plays an early bishop to f5, then white typically changes his plans. The most popular move in the database here is c4. So I mentioned in our introductory video that in the London system, white doesn't really play c4. He plays c3 instead and gets that triangle of pawns. Well, this is an exception to that idea. And I believe the reason white wants to push c4 here, it's because it opens this diagonal and the queen is going to come to b3 very soon. And since the light squared bishop has developed early, that leaves a weakness behind on b7. So white wants to get the queen out and pressure the center with the pawn and the knight on c3 and just play aggressively against this weakness. So white's changed to an aggressive setup. Okay, now e6, and white's next moves are going to be knight c3 and queen b3. It's important to play knight c3 to prepare the idea of attacking b7, and I want to show you why. If you just go after b7 right away with this knight sitting at home, then here's a good defense for black, and this is worth knowing. This can happen with either color. What black should play here is knight to c6 and just give up this pawn. And it's too dangerous to take because the knight comes forward to b5 supported by the dark square bishop, and the knight's threatening to come to c2. And the problem is this knight is blocking the rook. The rook can't move in this position, so white regrets not developing that knight earlier. So the only move here is knight to a3 to protect the fork from c2. Okay, but then black has a really nice plan. He'd like to get the bishop to e4 and attack the queen and the g2 square. But first he prefaces it with a pawn exchange to open up that diagonal. So bishop to e4 is more powerful. It attacks the queen and g2. And so black has a strong advantage in the position. Okay, so that's why you have to kind of couple this queen to b3 move with knight to c3. And knight c3 is typically played first, and then maybe c6 is the common reply, because white is prepared now to challenge that b7 pawn, and when white's going to do that, black would like to respond by playing queen to b6 to oppose the queens. So queen b3, queen b6, and now white gains space on the queen side with c5. We saw almost the same position with the colors reversed in an earlier video in this series. So it looks now like black is the one that's playing the London system because he has that nice triangle of pawns and that bishop out on f5. And it looks like white is playing the role of black because white has that pawn on c5 in this opening. So this should look familiar with the colors reversed. Okay, but white has an extra tempo. And this queen has no choice. It can't move here or here because these bishops have those squares covered. And it can't abandon b7, so black has to exchange queens. And I want to look closely at what happens after that exchange of queens. Okay, white is threatening something in the position. White is threatening to take the knight on b8 and then to take the pawn on a7. So black normally plays a6 to save the pawn. And then what white's going to do is push the b pawn forward. So b4, knight bd7, b5. So it looks like black has that square well defended, but he doesn't because the rook is still on a8. So white was in a hurry to get that pawn to b5 while that rook was still at home. And that means the a6 pawn is pinned. So if black takes, he has to take with the c pawn, and then white can take with the knight thanks to that pin. So the rook can move over to evade the pin and threaten the knight. And you can play the knight to d6 here. But another move that's very common is just dropping it back and playing slower and more positionally. And now white's plan is to push the other b pawn forward and to create a weakness on the queen side. And white has a lot of extra space and has all the play on the queen side here. Let's continue down a possible path. Black may go after the bishop pair, but white has nothing to worry about. He'll take that open h-file, bishop e7. And now a nice plan is to get your king to the center. And that king can support the bishop coming to d3 to challenge that bishop. Okay, castles, bishop d3, bishops exchange. And white's looking really good. It's got the extra space on the queen side, has the plan of pushing the b pawn, and has the open h-file. So white's to be preferred. Okay, let's go back to the beginning and look at the case where black gets to the b file with his queen first. So let's say d4, d5, bishop f4, knight f6, e3, and let's say black plays c5. So black gets in c5 before white gets in c4. So he keeps his bishop at home to protect that square. Okay, now knight f3 is common, knight c6, c3, queen b6. We saw this exact position in an earlier video. I just want to take a closer look at the line where white plays queen b3 and then c4 to gain space and attack the queen. And we'll look at two moves here. I have something new to say about each of these moves, but again, we saw this same position in an earlier video. Let's look at the queen exchange first. Last time we looked at this, I kind of stopped here and said black has an open A file. But let's say a little bit more now. Black has really the same ideas that we just looked at that white had. So black's going to push their b pawn forward. Okay, black's going to get the bishop out here, threaten the knight, put pressure on the a2 pawn. So white can push the a pawn to a3 to secure it. b5 comes, knight bd2, b4 comes. So that's the plan in that kind of a structure. Sometimes white enacts the plan, sometimes black does. Okay, c takes b4, knight takes b4. Again, the pawn on a3 is pinned. So rook c1, the knight can drop back, and we have the same kind of position with colors reversed. Okay, so that b pawn push is the new thing I wanted to talk about there. Now, another move after c5 is to drop the queen back instead of capturing, to drop it back to c2. Now, we saw this tactic bishop to f5 in an earlier video, but I have a little bit more to say about it. The point is, if white takes the bishop, then black takes on b2 and threatens the rook on a1, which cannot be defended. However, I learned a little subtlety. White can try to trap black's queen on a1. For example, suppose white plays bishop e2, and let's say black makes the mistake of taking the rook. Okay, that's a big mistake because queen to c2 traps that queen. Okay, and it's in danger of being lost. We're going to castle, we're going to move that knight, and the rook is going to be attacking that queen. And white's just winning in this position. So what does black do about that? Well, this move is not at fault. Bishop to f5 is still correct, and white should not take it. Because black will play queen takes b2, and if white plays some waiting move, some developing move like bishop to e2, hoping for black to go into the corner so he can get the queen back here to c2, well, then black should actually play e6 in the position before taking the rook. The idea is to drive the queen off of this diagonal so it cannot return to c2. It's got to move somewhere else, like maybe h3 or g5. And whenever it moves away, then black takes the rook, and there's no longer going to be a queen on c2 trapping it in. So black is winning. Okay, so something new I learned, and I learned that from Grandmaster Amon Hambledon. I'll put a link in the description of the video below. Okay, thanks for watching. I hope to continue with this series.